Hey, World History. Welcome to U5-L3 Ancient China Basics. So, from 2000 BCE until 220 CE. Learning targets evaluate narratives about the creation and influence of trade networks connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. We'll talk a little bit about that today, but mostly you're going to get that when we talk about the Silk Road, to be honest. So, your job, you're going to watch this Ed puzzle, you're going to answer the questions. Any question in blue text is going to be a question that I want you to answer directly on the Ed puzzle. And of course, if you have any questions, please let us know. We are here to help you. So, prepare yourself. We're about to fly through about 2,220 years of history and about even less than 30 minutes. What is it, like 20 minutes probably? Anyway, ooh, look at this. Here's a picture of your textbook. Did you know that we have a textbook? We actually do have a textbook. Um, I use it for information and stuff, but I never have you guys actually read out of it because let's be honest here. Who is going to read out of the textbook? That's why I make these videos instead, just FYI. So instead of reading the textbook, you get to listen to me talk about stuff. So that's kind of the trade-off. All right, so this is the first time your textbook focuses on Chinese history. According to your textbook, Chinese history starts at about 210 BCE. So, do you think Chinese history only started in 210 BCE? Yeah, that's a no. That's a hard no. All right, so Chinese history, of course, a lot of history goes back to the agricultural society. So we saw this map back in Unit 1. Wow. So this map shows where all the spots of agriculture began independently. We talked a little bit here about the Fertile Crescent. We'll talk about Mesoamerica as well next semester. But China is also one of those places. They started agriculture about 8,000 BCE. All right, so early China. So, like I said, 8,000 BCE is the first agricultural societies form in China. China is kind of a tricky country. At this time, it's not a country, but even today, when it is a actual country, it has a lot of different landscapes. So China has land barriers from Western Asia and Europe. So in the west, they have the tall Tian and Takla Mountains, also the Himalayan mountains as well. To the north, they have the Gobi Desert, which is a picture of the Gobi Desert right here. And then to the east, of course, they have the Pacific Ocean. But there are two very major and important bodies of water in China, and that is the Yellow River, which is right here, and the Yangtze River, which is right here. Between these two rivers is where early agriculture began, and rice really thrives in flooded fields from these rivers. So that's why rice is so important to the history of China and even China today. Herding animals started in the steppe lands of modern day Mongolia, which would be right up here. And then there is also subtropical forests in the southern part of China, which is by modern day Vietnam and Laos, so down here. So there's a wide variety of climates in China. All right, so here is a topical graph of China. So over here where the browns are, that means that it is a very high elevation. So as you can see in the plateau of Tibet, the Himalayan mountains, the Tian mountains up here as well, very high, very dry areas. And then over here we have the Gobi Desert, which I showed you a picture of before. We also over here then in the green is more lush landscapes. And then down here over by Vietnam and Laos, we have more of the tropical areas. All right, now here is a modern day map. So this was at about 2010. So what was that? About 15 years ago. Here's the population density of China. So where you see more of the dark reds means there's a higher population density. And where you see the little yellows or even just the white area, that means there's little to no people who live there. Okay. So, looking between these two pictures, what do you notice between the terrain of China and the modern population of China? So, between these two pictures, you will see that a lot of the densely populated areas are also where the areas are more lush, more lower lands, and more towards the Pacific Ocean. And then you will also see that less people live out where the big mountains are, the high plateaus, as you can see here and then here. Okay, So, timeline of Chinese dynasties for today. There are other Chinese dynasties out there, by the way. We're just going to talk about three of them today because honestly, if we talked about them all, we'd be here forever. So, we're going to start off with the Shang period, which was from 1766 to 1045 BCE. Then we're going to go into the Zhou period. Yes, this is pronounced Zhou, from 1045 to 221 BCE. And then we'll end off today with the Han Dynasty from 221 BCE to 220 CE. All right, so let's take a look at the map first. So we're going to start off with the Shang Dynasty. So the Shang Dynasty would be kind of the borders are kind of right here where this gray line is. So kind of right in the middle between the two major rivers, also not too far away from the Pacific Ocean. All right, so like I said, the Shang period was from 1766 to 1045 BCE. It was the first large dynasty in Chinese history. The king was seen as the direct connection to the Shang's main god, which was Di. And Di was considered like a divine god, like he was the god of the rulers. So the king was seen as a divine ruler, like he was blessed by the gods. The Shang period also had like a society based on warriors. So there was a lot of warfare and hunting, and they made conquered people. So those would be like soldiers and civilians who lost in a battle into enslaved peoples. They also were famous for their bronze weapons and their horse-drawn chariots in battle. Wait, stop, Miss Corey. Horses, 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 horses. So we all know horses are cool creatures, but where are horses from? And how did they get domesticated? Ah, that is a great question myself. So here's the short story of horses. So horses are the greatest animal companion to human history. Why? Because we can ride them. We can have them pull carts and farm equipment. They're used for battle, used as art, and also social status. And of course, you can also eat horses. So there's also Paleolithic art of wild horses in caves about 30,000 BCE. So that's a long, long time ago. So humans have admired horses for, well, you know, at least 32,000 years. So domesticated horses were first domesticated by humans in about 3,500 BCE in the Eurasian steppes. The Eurasian steppes are the land kind of between Europe and Asia. It is used in ancient cultures such as China, Rome, Greece, Egypt, Assyria, and Persia. And these horses were originally not ridden, but used to pull things such as chariots. So here's a question for you. What does someone need before a horse can be ridden? Yeah, there are two things. The first one being the saddle. So, saddles are tricky because we talked about how horses were domesticated at about 3,500 BCE, but saddles were not invented until 700 BCE by the Assyrians. And these saddles are not fancy like the saddles that you see today. They're pretty much just a thick cloth or leather laid over the back of the horse. They're used to sit more comfortably on the horse, and they had to use their hands to steer and control that horse. Then the second thing, of course, is stirrups. So the thing that dangles from the saddles, so humans can put their foot through it, and they can also steer the horse, and it also helps for mounting the horse. And stirrups were created in Persia in about 200 BCE. And again, this allowed a person to ride a horse with their hands empty. So, if a person's hands are free while riding a horse, thanks to the saddle and stirrup, what do you think people, specifically soldiers, are going to start carrying in their hands while riding horses? Weapons. Yep, that's right. Weapons. All right. So I gotta stop here. I'm getting way too ahead of myself. So we're talking about the Shang period still, and they were from around again 1766 to 1045 BCE, and the saddle wasn't even invented until 700 BCE, and the stirrup not until 200 BCE. So like this Shang dynasty didn't even have saddles and stirrups at this time. So you're probably wondering, why the heck did I even talk about saddles and stirrups and horses today? That is a good question. The reason why I had to talk about horses today is because later this unit, we're going to talk about the Mongols, and horses are super, duper, uber important to the Mongols. All right, let's go back to the Shang period. All right, so how do historians know about the Shang period? That's a really good question. So the Shang period is kind of a hard dynasty to study for historians because their cities were very poorly preserved. They're more into the northern part of China where they had some harsh climates. And the buildings were not made of stone, but wood, which you probably all know wood decays over time. And the cities were also surrounded by walls made of hardened dirt. And as you probably could imagine, dirt gets brittle over time and gets blown away. So, how do historians know about the Shang period? That's where they have to go underground because they need to dig through graves. So, paper was also not invented in China until about 105 CE. So, a lot of their documentation was actually etched into animal bone, like you see right here. There is also a lot of valuable objects in graves, such as metals, bronze, ivory, shells, musical instruments, jewelry, like we see here, and bronze and also weapons. So here's a handle of a blade right here. All right, next, let's talk about the Zhou dynasty. So the Zhou dynasty, there's an early and late, but we're just going to kind of combine them both and talk about them together. So the Zhou dynasty would have this light blue area right here. So definitely growing from what the Shang dynasty was. So the Zhou period, again, I know it starts with a Z, but it's pronounced Zhou. And that was from 1045 to 221 BCE. So the Zhou overthrew the Shang dynasty in 1045 BCE. It's really unknown where the Zhou people came from and all of that, but somehow they successfully overthrew the Shang dynasty. It is the longest dynasty in all of Chinese history, which is true. It's about, what, 800 years? The first king of the Zhou period was named Wu, and he overthrew the Shang because he was not happy with the way that they were honoring gods and ancestors. So King Wu created something called the Mandate of Heaven. That is where the gods decide who was the king. So, for example, if there was a flood, a famine, an invasion, or other natural disaster, it was a sign from the gods that the king was failing. He was no good anymore, and that a new king needed to take his place. So it was kind of not a great role for a king. You could be the best king ever, ruling your country great. All of a sudden, a huge flood comes, and people would be like, well, king, you're out of here because the gods don't like you anymore. So kind of a tough position to be in. If there wasn't any big like natural disasters or anything like that, the kingship would be passed down through the family. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about the Han Dynasty, which was from 221 BCE to 220 CE. All right, so beforehand, China was broken up into the Zhou Dynasty as well as a bunch of several warring states. So, what is a warring state? A warring state is independent territories that are always fighting each other for land. So, the ruler of the region of Qin in the Zhou Dynasty was named Shi Huangdi, and he conquered the warring states as well as the entirety of the Zhou Dynasty. He would then go on to expand its territory to cover most of what would be now modern day China. So, beforehand, when we talked about the Shang and the Zhou Dynasty, they kind of like this little triangle area, like right in here. Now, with the Han Dynasty, you can see that it is stretching all the way over here, going down more towards the south, and pretty much has all of this land from the Pacific Ocean, even up into what is modern day Korea. So, let's talk about the Han Dynasty, and there's a lot to talk about with it. So, we're just going to focus on the society of the Han Dynasty. So in 2 CE, I know, just 2 CE is a weird date, I know. The Chinese government decided to do a census. So their census was very similar to how we do census today. So we still have census in the United States as well. So pretty much people go out and they ask questions about like, how many people live in your house? How old are your family members? What do you guys do for a job? The Chinese government did that 2,000 years ago for 60 million people living in China. Wow, that is an incredible feat. 60 million people. So, in the Han Dynasty, multiple generations would live under the same house. The eldest males were the head of the family, and they had the big tradition of respecting elders, ancestors, and as well as the gods. So, women who were wives or moms to the emperor or other high ranking officials did have some influence over politics, and they did that through influencing their men in their life. But otherwise, everyday women were just subjected to males. So, for example, parents would choose who the woman would marry. The bride would then go to live with her husband's family. The bride would then have to prove herself to her mother in law. And then what would happen? There'd be this big competition between the mother in law and the bride for the respect of what would be the bride's husband or the mother in law's son. So, a lot of female rivalry going on. So, here is an excerpt from a book about the role of women in the Han Dynasty. So it says traditional beliefs about conduct appropriate for women are preserved in a biography of the mother of the Confucian philosopher Mengzi. So it says a woman's duties are to cook the 5 grains, heat the wine, look after her parents in law, make clothes, and that is all. She has no ambitions to manage affairs outside the house. She must follow the 3 submissions. When she is young, she must submit to her parents. After her marriage, she must submit to her husband. When she is widowed, she must submit to her son. So it's pretty much saying at all times in a woman's life, she is under the control of some sort of man. All right, next, let's take a look at the triangle of hierarchy in the Han Dynasty society. So this hierarchy is a little bit different than what we see, like especially in Europe hierarchy. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Middle Ages and stuff. Of course, at the very top, you would have the emperor because he's seen as the divine ruler. Below him would be the people who report to him, such as like the kings and governors. Below them would be the state officials and nobles and scholars. But below them would be the peasants. So typically in Europe, peasants would be towards like way, way the bottom. But in Chinese society, especially during the Han Dynasty, they were a little bit more towards the middle. The reason for that is because peasants were seen as so essential for the Han Dynasty because they're the ones growing the food, they're doing the manual labor. Below them would be the artisans and merchants. Then we also have the soldiers. And then the very, very last would be the enslaved people. All right, so you're probably like, wait, Miss Corey, what about all the other super cool things that China invented over the years? I know there are some awesome things. So, China invented things like gunpowder, the Chinese compass, porcelain pottery, ancient Chinese mathematics, and the abacus, silk, the search for elixir of life, the Grand Canal, the Three Gorges Dam, Terracotta Army, Great Wall, traditional Chinese healthcare and medicine, the Forbidden City, the movable type, foot binding, paper and paper money, and also Chinese writing. Oh my gosh, there's so many things we didn't talk about, but that is okay because you will be able to research some of these topics in your mini project for the summit. All right, let's wrap this up for today. So today we talked about Chinese geography, the Shang period, horses, saddles, and stirrups, the Zhou period, and the Han Dynasty, as well as Chinese society within the Han Dynasty. Next up, you're going to do U5-L4, the rise and the fall of the Mongol Empire, U5-L5, ancient Japan, Heian, and the shogunates. And of course, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you want to learn more, please let us know. We are here to help you. Thanks for watching. Bye.